Hello everyone and welcome to PMDD and Me Meets the Professionals. My name is Alice. I'm a reproductive health specialist midwife, a teacher and co-founder of PMDD and Me. In today's webinar, we are talking sex and relationships for people with premenstrual dysphoric disorder and for those in the menopause, whether it be natural, chemical, or surgical. As always, you can talk to other participants through the chat, and you can ask your questions by clicking on the Q&A button, and we'll get through as many of those as we can over the next hour. So to lead on our topic, may I introduce our speaker. She is a menopause expert, a wellbeing consultant, and the driving force behind the hugely successful Make Menopause Matter campaign, Diane Danzebrink. Good afternoon, Diane.
Hi, Alice. Lovely to see you. Nice to be here.
Thank you so much for joining us.
My absolute pleasure. Welcome to my messy office.
It's been so interesting during lockdown, doing all of these webinars and just having a nose around people's homes. So,
yeah, well, mine's a bit like this.
Thank you for doing this. It's a really
Pleasure.
interesting topic. I can't wait to hear what you have to say, being in the menopause myself. So I'm going to hand straight over to you.
All right, lovely. Okay, that's fine. Okay, so we've got about an hour, haven't we? So I thought I'll speak for about half an hour, and then hopefully we can do some questions, or we can just chat amongst ourselves, whatever. So when Alice kindly invited me to do this, which is a while ago now, 2 seconds, lovely people, I'm just going to pull a blind because I can see that I'm very shiny on one side. Okay. You can see I'm prepared. Anyway, so when she asked me to do this, which was a while ago now, I thought, do you know what, this is such a personal and a sensitive subject that I decided, Alice kindly invited me to use slides, and I decided that I didn't want to do that because I think this is a very personal subject. And so I'm really just going to talk to you for about half an hour. I really wished you could see my desk, because my desk is covered in vibrators, dilators, lubricant, different types of hormone treatment, which I'm going to share with you. But first of all, I thought it'd be helpful if, I'm sure lots of you have no idea who I am. So I thought I would tell you a little bit about me. So Alice, as she rightly said, my name's Diane Danzebrink. Alice and I met formally, we knew of each other, but we met formally at Daisy Day last year, when I did a very similar talk about essentially sex, relationships. Obviously at Daisy, all those women are in premature menopause for one reason or another. Lots of them had their partners with them, and I had some really interesting conversations afterwards. And then Alice came and asked me if I would do a similar thing for PMDD and Me, which I'm delighted to do. So how I get to be sitting here is that just around 8 years ago, I went into surgical menopause quite rapidly. Didn't really have sort of much time to think about it. Because it was suspected that I had ovarian cancer. At the time of my surgery, it also transpired that I had been living for about 15 years with stage 4 endometriosis. I'd been backwards and forwards to the doctors lots of times, spent a lot of time curled up on the floor, had the most horrific periods, etc. And it was also discovered that I had a condition called adenomyosis. So because of the ovarian cancer suspicion, I had a total hysterectomy, you know, sort of within a couple of weeks of the possible diagnosis. Very fortunately for me, I had it just, you know, at the right time, essentially, not a moment too late, too soon. And being thrown into surgical menopause and having no idea about it, I hadn't had time to prepare. I had no information about surgical menopause given to me before or after my surgery, and was just told to go and see my GP. Long story short, I didn't take HRT because nobody had explained it to me and why it was so important. And that was really not great for me, because that affected me hugely, affected me enormously psychologically, took me to a really dark place. And when I did finally get the right help and support, which was several months after my surgery, and mainly thanks to my partner, I started to wonder if it could just be me who had had this really awful experience, and if I'd just been unlucky. And so I started to look around, I started to research, and I found thousands of women who were having equally poor experiences, started to research historically and found that actually this had been going on for far too long. So decided to set up something called Menopause Support, which, like PMDD and me, is a community interest company. So we're a not-for-profit organisation. Essentially what we do is we offer one-to-one support sessions for individuals and couples, and we also do training in the workplace. We run a big Facebook community called the Menopause Support Network, and in 2018 I started, as Alice said, the Make Menopause Matter campaign, which is very much about trying to improve things. So I'm delighted to say that already we have ensured that menopause is now part of the new RSE curriculum in secondary education. And the next two sort of aims on our list are to ensure that all GPs receive mandatory menopause education, and that menopause is better supported in the workplace. And I think we can certainly add lots of other women's health issues to that, things like PMDD, endometriosis, etc. As I say, as somebody who went through many, many years of excruciating pain and really heavy periods, I know that it's not well recognised, and in recent years have become much more aware of the problems and the issues that women experiencing PMDD have when getting a diagnosis. So that's a little kind of background to me. Now, I know that the lovely Dr. Hannah Short has spoken to you all about PMDD and menopause already. So I thought, as Alice had asked me specifically to concentrate on sex and relationships, that is exactly what I would do. So I know for me personally, after my surgery, I was very nervous about any kind of physical contact with anybody. So I had a total abdominal hysterectomy. So I was very nervous about any kind of contact at all, very protective of my pelvic area particularly. And I think the thing is, you know, having counselled now a lot of women who have gone into either surgical or medical menopause because of their PMDD, or in fact counselling women who are now in perimenopause, and perimenopause has really highlighted for them that they've been experiencing PMDD for many years. I think it's really important to say that everybody's experience is different. But I think one of the things that is really important is whatever you're going through is about trying to manage expectations. because if you're a woman who is experiencing PMDD and you're now in a medical menopause because you're using GnRH analogues, I think it's important that you recognise that certainly for a period of time, you can use those analogues without having add-back hormones, but it's also important to know that at some point you will need to have add-back hormones for what can be the menopausal symptoms. Obviously, if you go into a surgical menopause, then usually, particularly for women with PMDD, usually it's ovaries, womb, and cervix. Some people elect to keep their cervix if the consultant has that conversation with them. Very often not, because that means then that you don't need to have any progesterone. And for many women with PMDD, progesterone is not good with them. So I think one of the things that's important to recognise is actually what the menopause symptoms are, because as I say, I've now counselled so many women who have had absolutely no sort of conversations around, they're told that they'll go into menopause, but there's really no conversation around what the symptoms are, and there's definitely no conversation around sex. And, you know, for most of it, it's an important part of our lives. And it really is something that we as patients should expect to receive information on so that we can make really informed decisions. So I've got loads of things around me, as I said, so I'm gonna share a lot of them with you. And the first thing that I'm going to share with you is the Menopause Support Symptom Checker. So this is a checker that we put together from the members of our group. So we've got about 15,500 members in the group. And rather than telling them what was going to be on the checker, we actually asked them, we said to them, what are the things that you experience the most often? So there's 32 symptoms on there. And you can download that from the menopausesupport.co.uk website, if only I could say it. And you will see on there are vaginal and urinary symptoms and loss of libido. So we're going to talk about all of those. I'm really going to kind of concentrate on that area specifically because of, for so many people, the reason that they're not having sex or they're frightened to have sex after they've had either a surgical menopause or in a chemical menopause is because of, firstly, how's it going to be? But also, for a lot of people, they have no idea about the importance of estrogen to that entire pelvic area. So I thought it would be useful just to explain very quickly the, sort of the importance of estrogen specifically to the pelvic area. So the entire pelvic area of the body is very reliant on estrogen for its continued well-being, essentially for its ongoing health. And that's particularly as we age. But if we're going into an early menopause, then it's absolutely vital that women who are in an early menopause receive the right information. So there are lots of estrogen and testosterone receptors in the body. And particularly for the vaginal, the vulval, and the bladder, and also for the urethra, it's really important there that you know that you can have supplemental estrogen and how important that is to those areas. I think the other thing that's key to say is about allowing yourself time. As I say, particularly if you've gone into a surgical menopause, is looking at actually give yourself time to recover from the surgery, and don't have time limits. Don't think to yourself, okay, so I have to be doing this by X amount of time. It's really important to take care of yourself. The other thing, of course, is about communicating what's going on to those around us. And for those of you who have lived for a long time with PMDD, you will know that for a lot of people who've lived with PMDD, they haven't known what's going on. It's also been very difficult for them when they've tried to seek professional help, because very often it's not recognised, or even if it is recognised, then there's quite a long wait to be referred to a specialist. So I think it's key. Information, really is key, both for ourselves, but also for our partners. So if if you're in a relationship with somebody, and you've been in a relationship with somebody for a long time, and they've been through PMDD with you, and then you're going to go into menopause, it's key that you have the right information, but it's absolutely vital that they have some too, because it can be such an emotional roller coaster for us as individuals, but also for our partners. Because if we don't understand what's happening, it's absolutely vital that we ensure that our partners know. And also for those of you who have children and wider family connections, that's also key. So I have written something called Understanding Menopause for Partners. It's just a few pages. I think it's 6 A4 pages, but it was actually, the reason that I wrote it was because I was on a cab journey one day, and got chatting with a cab driver whose wife, once we got talking, obviously was a woman who had probably lived with PMDD for many, many years, but had been undiagnosed. And she was now in menopause, and that had essentially exacerbated her symptoms. And we got talking about it, and he just had no clue of how to support her. And I came home and I thought, I don't know of a resource that there is for partners. So I thought, okay, let's write something. So it's really 10 top tips, and those 10 tips are for partners to educate themselves as much as they can using reliable sources of information, asking them not to put any undue pressure on their partners, because at a time when we're going through either treatment or surgery, that's really the last thing that anybody needs. Actually, to ask your partner what she needs rather than trying to guess. To accept the silence. I don't know about any of you, but I certainly have spent quite a long time sort of being quiet, being introverted, and that definitely happened to me as a result of my surgery. I needed some time to process everything. Resisting the urge to snap back. So definitely, a lot of people talk about being more irritable, and I think sort of if our partners can recognize what's happening and learn actually that just to walk away rather than, and I don't mean walk away for good, I mean walk away in the moment. Encouraging a partner to that it's okay to change plans at the last minute. I know for a lot of people, they find that actually they don't feel that they're ready to go out and socialize. They need some time to heal, whether that is receiving a diagnosis, whether that is going into, as I say, either surgical or medical menopause. For a lot of us, we actually need time. That's really one of the most important things, and having that support is absolutely key. Not forgetting to tell your partner that you love them, that they're still important to you. And then sex. So, if we're honest, sex for a lot of people is a difficult subject. I think I began the Daisy Day talk by saying sex is something that we do, it's not something that we talk about. And I think for a lot of people that's still very true. I certainly hear that very regularly when I'm working mainly with women, but I certainly hear that all the time. And it's so important that we think about having those conversations and how to start those conversations, because it's not always easy. And finally, it's about keeping the lines of communication open. You know, so often I hear from women, and sometimes from partners too, whether male or female partners, who say, you know, something's changed, but I don't know how to start the conversation. And then people will start to perhaps go to bed at different times, you know, to avoid each other, etc. So trying to keep those lines of communication open is absolutely vital. So that guide called Understanding Menopause for Partners, again, is on the Menopause Support website. I think the other thing to remember is, particularly when we're talking about sex, is that it should never be painful for anybody. And again, you know, I speak to far too many people where sex has become painful, either as they've got older or as a result of surgery or treatment. So one of the things that I wanted to touch on, which is often not spoken about, is the menopause symptom of vaginal dryness. Or what might also be called vaginal atrophy. So vaginal atrophy is one of the terms used for this symptom. Urogenitary syndrome of menopause is another one. You will come across others. But essentially, symptoms can be things like dryness, soreness, irritation. Bizarrely, as it's called vaginal dryness in some places, there can actually be a very watery type of discharge. So don't be, don't be put off on the wrong track. Increased UTIs, so things like cystitis, urgency, urinary incontinence. And it's also important to remember that because estrogen is such a nourisher and a lubricant for the body, that as the estrogen levels deplete, whether that's slowly in a natural menopause or whether that's quickly in either a surgical or a medical menopause, it's really important to know that not only can we have systemic types of HRT, but there are also local estrogens that can be used. So if you're somebody who's in either a medical or a surgical menopause, or a natural menopause, in fact, if you're already using hormone replacement therapy, but you're struggling with any of those symptoms, then it could be that you need to have your dose titrated. So it could be that your HRT dose needs to be titrated up slightly. But there are other things that you can do too. So it's important to know that there are several different types of what we call local estrogen, and local estrogen is not HRT. So local estrogen is tiny, tiny doses of estrogen. If you use a type of local estrogen for a year, it's roughly equivalent to using 2 days of a year's worth of systemic HRT tablets. So it's, as I say, it's absolutely tiny doses. So I wanted to just go through a couple of them with you so that you've got some ideas of what you might like to ask your GP or specialist for. So one of the really popular ones is this one here. This is called Vagifem. So you can see in the end there's a little tiny white tablet. And this is used for, so this is inserted into the vagina, and this is used for two weeks every night, and then usually between 2 and 5 times a week, depending on how severe the vaginal symptoms are. That's probably one of the first ones that usually gets prescribed, but there are also estrogen creams. So there's a cream called Ovestin and another one called estriol. They can be used internally and externally, so on the vulva and in the vagina. And then there's also a vaginal ring, which is called an e-string. So it's very small, and a lot of women can insert them themselves. For some, they have to ask either the nurse or the doctor to insert, and that sits there for 90 days, and that delivers a tiny, tiny dose of local estrogen. And as I say, they can be used either independently or alongside your HRT, and there's not a contraindication to you having both. You're not going to be overdosing because it's tiny local doses. And then you have things like the lubricants and the moisturizers. So just when you're thinking about either a lubricant or a moisturizer, just be sort of very mindful of having a look to see what's actually in it, because a lot of them will contain things like glycerin, glycols, parabens. You don't want anything that's fragranced. So ideally, something that is as natural and organic as possible. So there's a couple that a lot of people like. So there's the Silk and the Yes. Now that's not recommendations, but they're ones that a lot of people like because they are more natural. And the Yes range of products are also organic. So they do a water-based, an oil-based, and they do a vaginal moisturizer too. So these can be used alongside the local estrogens. No reason not to use them alongside the local estrogens if you choose to. Obviously, the vaginal moisturizer can be used on a regular basis. Some people use that sort of every 2 or 3 times a week. The lubricants are for penetration. It's also worth saying that for a lot of people, if you still have your cervix, then you will still need to be going for a cervical smear. And particularly if you are not on, if you're on HRT, but you're still experiencing those vaginal symptoms, a lot of people are put off of going for a cervical smear. So just be aware that you can ask, and for, sort of, I would suggest insist that you have lubricant used when you're having your smear, because it's so important that people don't miss them when they still have their cervix. But I tend to speak to a lot of people who are not going along for their cervical smears because of this vaginal soreness or dryness. Also really important to say that as far as sort of our long-term vaginal and vulval and bladder health is concerned, really key that we estrogenize. So again, if you are experiencing any of those symptoms and that's having an effect on you personally and in your relationship, it's also important to know that there are other things that you can do to help yourself. I have a really good friend of mine, a lady called Jane Lewis, who some of you may have heard of, has written a fabulous book called Me and My Menopausal Vagina. And Jane has actually also written a fabulous leaflet all about vaginal and urinary symptoms of menopause. You can download that from Jane's website, which is, and I always get it wrong, mymenopausalvagina.co.uk. So Jane and I met a couple of years ago now. She came along to see me for some counselling because she was really struggling with the vaginal symptoms of menopause. And it was, as much as she was trying to tackle the sort of the hormone side of it, she really came along to talk to me about the emotional impact that it was having on her. And I'm so delighted that once we had finished working together, she decided to write this amazing book about it, which is empowering so many women. I also have another fabulous friend, a lady called Sam Evans, who runs a company called Joe Divine, which sells skin-safe sex toys. And again, if you're somebody who's been living with those urinary and vaginal symptoms of menopause, hopefully now you've got some ideas about what you can do about it from the point of view of treatment. But also, I think it's really important to know that there are some skin safe products that can be so helpful. So as I said, Alice and I originally met at Daisy Day, and when we met, after I'd given this talk about menopause and sex and how it affects us all, and the impact that it can have on relationships, a lovely couple who had travelled all the way from Sweden came up to speak to me, and the lady explained that she had PMDD, that she had never had the right information about hormone replacement therapy when she was much younger, and her partner had not been able to have penetrative sex for about 20 years. And we started to talk about it, and I started to talk to her about seeing a specialist, etc. And just her being able to have the conversation made such an enormous difference. You could kind of see the weight lifting from both her and his shoulders, that somebody was there to talk to them about it. But I also introduced her to the silicone dilators, because what can happen, particularly to the vagina, is that as the estrogen depletes, it can become shorter. And the tissue obviously is no longer as flexible as it used to be. And so there is I'm sure some of you will have come across the NHS dilators, which are quite hard, can be quite harsh. So there is a set of dilators called Inspire, and they're incredible. They come in 5 different sizes in a set, and it's very, very, very skin safe. And these can be used for you to actually introduce to try to help yourself along with the lubricants. They can be so helpful. So these, as I say, this is the Inspire set of dilators. They can be very helpful. And then there are things like very tiny, small vibrators that can be really useful. Somebody's just asking about being unsure about extra estrogen. So if you're unsure about having extra estrogen, it depends why you're feeling unsure about it. Maybe you just haven't had the right advice and support. Maybe you haven't been given the latest factual evidence-based information. If you're at all concerned about having extra estrogen, it depends why. So maybe you want to say why you would be concerned about having extra estrogen, what the concern would be, and we can talk about that in the questions after. But there is another fabulous book which I would really, as you can see, it's really well thumbed. I would really highly recommend to you. It's a book called Estrogen Matters, and it's by a gentleman called Avram Blooming. And this essentially is talking you through, it's very accessible, but it's talking you through why estrogen is so important for the body long term. It looks at all the issues around it. looks very much at the concerns around things like breast cancer, etc. Very up to date, and I really recommend it to you. So if you've got any concerns about add back estrogen, then this is definitely a book to be taking a look at. I think, you know, sort of talking about kind of, we've talked about the physical side of this, but I think it's also key that women have the right emotional support when they're going through this, and that's not always easy to find. So I know that for PMDD, there are great organisations. So we have Vicious Cycle, we have IAPMD, you have PMDD and Me. But, you know, sort of very often we need to be able to talk about these things too, not just to our partners, but also to people who understand what it is we're going through. And it can be a huge relief just to be able to talk about it. But the British Menopause Society did some research. They did a survey on women and how their menopause symptoms affected them. And I think this was back in 2017. I think it was 51% said it had menopause had a huge impact on their sex lives. And then around 50% of women said that they were too embarrassed to go along and talk to their doctors about this. So I would really encourage you, please don't be embarrassed about it. Please do go along. And whether you're with a consultant or whether you're with a GP, and if you're with a GP, always ask if there's a women's health specialist, or if one of the nurses in the practice specialises in menopause. Again, if you go to the website, we have some resources on there about getting the most out of your doctor's appointment. We have another one called 10 Things Your Doctor Should Know About Menopause. And then we've got a couple on frequently asked questions. So somebody spoke about having whether or not they could introduce more estrogen. We've got a frequently asked questions on there, all about estrogen and progesterone. And then importantly, we also have another guide to understanding the psychological symptoms of menopause. Because for those of you who have lived with PMDD, you will of course be very familiar with your own symptoms of PMDD. But then going into either a surgical or medical menopause, that can be another challenge. So it's really key, and I think it's absolutely vital, particularly for women who have had PMDD, who then go into, as I say, either a surgical or medical menopause, that they have good support, and that you're given, you know, we campaign really hard for women to have factual, evidence-based, non-biased information, because essentially this should really be about women being able to make an informed choice about their treatment. So whatever treatment you decide to have, it's really important. And I think, you know, we would certainly like to see more partners involved in that. We would like to see partners being involved in, you know, what they would like as far as support, because that's not really something that is available at the moment. So I think if you're living through this with somebody, it's absolutely key that they also have some support to be able to support you. I mentioned about the cervical smears. Just going back briefly to the lubricants, if you're going to use any of those, please do make sure that you do a skin patch test. So whether that is, so that's for you, and if you have a partner, for your partner too. So make sure that you skin patch before you use them, because it's really important that there's no reaction to them. As I said, try to avoid any of the ones with anything like the parabens, glycol and glycerin in them. I think one of the things that when I work with women, one of the things that they find really difficult is actually to be kind to themselves, to not beat themselves up. And very often they talk about, and I know I experienced this personally, very often they talk about this idea of those around them becoming essentially just fed up with hearing what they're going through. And I think if you've got somebody in your life who loves you, then they're going to be there for you. But it is equally important that we have some kind of support system for them too. But I think it's very easy for us to be very hard on ourselves. So I would really urge you to, find your tribe. Sort of find a supportive group where you can share. It's so important to have people who understand what you're going through. And whilst all of us will experience everything differently, I think it's always such a relief. I'm sure lots of you will, will experience this. It's always such a relief when you can speak to somebody who understands just how you feel. I think that's really key. So let me just check the time here. Oh my goodness, I've been speaking for 42 minutes. So Alice, I know somebody mentioned about, there were a few questions that came up. So do we want to go through some of the questions and cover some of the ground there?
I could listen to you all day, Diane. That was fascinating.
Sure you wouldn't want to, lovely.
There have been some questions that have come through, and I've got a few questions of my own as well, if that's all right.
Yeah, of course, please do.
So I know for a lot of people who are in the menopause, it did happen overnight.
Yeah.
And there wasn't necessarily that lead up and those symptoms, and it can almost be quite a big crash.
Yeah.
And I think that can have that big impact on body image, and like you said right at the beginning, expectations of menopause. The number of times I get told on a weekly basis, you're too old for that. You're not old enough.
You're too young. Yeah, you're too young.
And it's like, well, we don't talk about sex if you're old. That doesn't happen. Therefore, the menopause and the expectations surrounding sex and relationships, it like you say, it just doesn't get talked about.
Yeah, I mean, I think, we could go on for a long time talking about this, but I think, there is such a huge social pressure around women aging for a start, and then you have these women who perhaps they're in their 20s or 30s, and they go into, I can remember talking about my own surgical menopause as being brutal. I really did feel that it was brutal. And hopefully in the future women will have the right information, but it's about so much more than the surgery, isn't it? Because it's about the fact that you're being plunged into something that you probably haven't even thought about. You probably thought it was going to happen at some time in your 50s, so you've had surgery. We haven't even had the time to talk about how women then view themselves if they no longer have their womb or their ovaries, about, how feminine they still feel. And I know that's very different for every individual woman. I know for some women, it's huge. It's something that they really need to work through, and that can take, I think this is the other thing, is the amount of time that it can take each of us to work through this. And when I said about not putting pressure on yourself, and also why I wrote the Understanding Guide, trying to encourage partners not to put pressure on their partners, not just around sex, but around socializing, around having holidays. It's such a difficult thing to understand if you've never gone through it. And it's such a complex area, because young women, they sort of, not only for the women that you support, not only have they had to experience PMDD, there might have been other things. They might have had endometriosis too. That's that's complex. Then you're being thrown into a surgical or medical menopause, so that feels really unfair for a lot of people. And that can take some getting your head around. And that's before you start to think about, how do I now feel as a woman? That's before you have to start negotiating around complex relationships with partners, with family, and even before we get to the intimacy of sex. I think the thing is, when I read about surgical menopause, I read about, oh yeah, you have to have 6 weeks. If you've had a total abdominal hysterectomy, you have to give yourself 6 weeks and then you can go back to work. And it's kind of, who wrote that? Okay, some women maybe, but for others, they will need time to be able to come to terms with that for themselves. And we've spoken about relationships today very much in terms of relationships with other people. We haven't even touched upon our relationships with ourselves.
I think it could be a whole topic in itself. I think
absolutely.
For me, it's my hysterectomy anniversary tomorrow.
Is it?
Yes. And it'll be 4 years tomorrow, and I was not expecting the grief that came with it.
Yeah.
And I think that's hugely forgotten. And
yeah.
if you've been battling with a reproductive health illness, whether it be PMDD or something like endometriosis or other debilitating disorders, you think, great, the menopause, however I enter it, whether it be medical or surgical, will fix everything and I'll be fine afterwards. And the number of people that contact me saying, I've had my surgery, I'm having my treatment, but emotionally I don't know where to go, and I'm pushing everyone away.
Well, Alice, I'm 4 years in front of you, so it was my 8-year anniversary a couple of weeks ago, and I still find it, I'm still reflecting on the years before, and there is still new emotion coming up. I still feel angry about all the years that, sort of I had to cancel things, etc., because of my undiagnosed condition. So I totally recognize that. It's the whole relationship with ourselves around what we've experienced. I think you're right. It's a whole other hour.
I think that leads really nicely onto a question that we got from one of our attendees called Jessica. And she said that when her anxiety is rocketing and she's struggling with both PMDD and perimenopause, is that she tends to push people away. And she's asking, how do you stay present in a relationship in that sense, when intimacy on a personal scale, let alone physical, it's not even in the forefront of your mind?
Yeah, I mean, something that I'm in a very, I feel very honored by what I get to do, because I get to work with a lot of women in menopause, but increasingly I get to work with young women who have experienced or are experiencing PMDD and potentially facing menopause too. And one of the things that I really encourage people to do is sometimes you will know this yourself, sometimes it just can be almost impossible to open your mouth and start to, we always talk about communication. And one of the things that I really encourage people to do is to write things down, is to not just for yourself to record what's going on, but also if you just feel that on that particular day or that particular week, you're finding it so difficult, you really want to distance yourself from your partner, you feel very internalized, is actually to write it down and just to try to explain to them, even if it's just a short note, just to tell them that you recognize and you appreciate the fact that they're there, but just that you're in that phase where you absolutely, and PMDD and perimenopause together, that can be such a difficult thing to navigate. We desperately need to have better support for for women who are experiencing both. And better than me, kind of the lack of professional support that there is for PMDD.
Yeah, absolutely, I completely agree. And I didn't really start to see an impact in my ability to communicate and be present in my relationship until I started doing DBT, so the dialectical behavior therapy. And that made a huge difference to me. And yeah, like you say, that diary, writing things down, it does make a massive difference, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, it's huge. When you just can't speak, when you just can't bear the pressure, and not another 1%, being able to communicate in some way, shape or form makes such a difference.
And like you say, we could talk for hours on that, and maybe we will. Can I move on to the very almost taboo subject of vaginal pain? We don't talk about it. We don't like saying the words vagina, vulva.
No. It's still called all sorts of weird and wonderful things when it's got perfectly good anatomical names. Yeah,
absolutely. And the questions that sort of came to mind while you were talking about it was we say pain, but does it make a difference where in the vagina that pain is as to what treatment would potentially be best?
Well, the thing is, we talk about vaginal pain, don't we, as you say, as one thing, whereas for some people it's vulval, for some people it's clitoral, for some people it is vaginal. So depending on, so if it's vulval discomfort, so if it's itching, dryness of the vulva, of the labia, then actually it's probably going to be one of the creams. If your symptoms are not well treated by your systemic HRT, and it's probably worth going back to ask for that to be titrated up a little bit, but it's probably going to be one of the creams. If it is vaginal, so if it is internal, then we're probably and again clitoral, it's probably one of the creams. But if it is internal, then you're probably talking about one of the pessaries in one way, shape or form. And it's not just one size fits all. There's a gel pessary, there's a gel, there's a soft pessary. We have 8 different local products now.
And they're available on prescription, you said?
They are, Alice, but can I just mention as well, if you are experiencing that, it might also be worth you either asking to be referred to a women's health physio or going to see a women's health physio independently, for her to do, women's health physios, basically it's all about the pelvis. They are amazing, they do fantastic work, and kind of if there is any kind of if there is any tightness there in the tissue, then they will work very, very gently. They're very, very good. It's well worth considering that too.
I think that there is a lack of awareness of women's health physios, definitely.
Huge.
And I think the other caveat that we should say is that if you do have any pain or discomfort in your vagina or vulva, we do need to obviously get that checked to make sure there's nothing untoward going on as well.
Absolutely. And you know, kind of if you're in a natural or a medical menopause, any kind of vaginal bleeding, then you know, please go straight back to your doctor to have that checked too.
And the other thing that I've really resonated with me was that you said that the local estrogens are not HRT, and I think that is commonly misunderstood. And actually that may be something that our trans men community who have vaginal pain because they have estrogen suppressed, will actually really benefit from knowing.
Definitely. And they are tiny doses. So as I said, a year's worth of vaginal estrogen is the equivalent of taking 2 of a year's worth of oral systemic HRT tablets. They are really tiny doses and they can be incredibly effective. Yeah, absolutely.
So what is it about the parabens and the glycogens that have such a negative impact on our vaginas?
Well, they're just things that shouldn't be there, essentially. So there is a pH balance within the vagina and the vulva, which needs to be maintained. So, you know, kind of if things like, so glycerin is a sugar anyway, we don't want that in there. We definitely don't want things like lavender, rose, vanilla. You know, if our vaginas were supposed to smell like that, that's how they would smell. You know, they have a fragrance all of their own. But, you know, kind of, we don't want those kinds of things in there. We want to be using the most natural and, if possible, you know, where you can, organic. The other product that I would briefly mention, Alice, is, so this is something that can be bought over the counter. Well, I say bought over the counter. It's actually an Australian product. It's all completely natural. So olive oil and beeswax. And this can be a really nice moisturizer for the vulva. A lot of people find this really helpful. So that's another product. And as I say, that's completely natural. But, you know, just be, whatever you're going to be using, and obviously it has to be personal choice, but just be very aware, just be very mindful of what it is that you're using.
Absolutely. I've got a couple of questions just wanted in the chat. Somebody said she's very excited. I can't find her name now. Jacqueline, I think, is very excited because she's just got her HRT today.
Excellent.
She had to go privately, which is unfortunate. So hopefully,
that's unfortunate.
Hopefully she can get some really good resources through your website to go back to her GP with.
Yeah, absolutely lovely. So, you know, if anybody would like to come and join the Facebook group, as I said, there's about 15,500 of us. It's called the Menopause Support Network. You'll find lots of resources on the Menopause Support website. Under resources, just click on. As I said, Jane's leaflet you can download from her website too. There's things like Women's Health Concern, which is the patient arm of the British Menopause Society. Alice, somebody's just asked, does testosterone help with libido? So if you're somebody who has had your ovarian function suppressed, so in an induced menopause, or if you're somebody who's had your ovaries removed, if you're a young woman who has had either of those, unless there is a very good reason why not, you should be offered testosterone replacement, because, you know, women actually, at some points in our lives, we produce more testosterone than estrogen anyway. There's a very clever process that goes on where a lot of it is turned back into 17 beta estradiol, which is the type of estrogen that is most prevalent in a woman's body. But absolutely, just quickly, have I got time just to quickly talk about testosterone for 2 minutes? Just quickly to say that it won't surprise you, but unfortunately, currently in the UK, there is not a testosterone product, even though we produce it naturally, there is not a testosterone product that is licensed for women. The only testosterone products are licensed for men, but some of you may have enlightened GPs. A lot of GPs are quite nervous about giving testosterone to women, so you may have to be referred into a specialist clinic. But basically what happens is the doses for men are titrated down for women. So to give you an example, this little packet here is something called Testogel, and women are generally told to use one of these packets between 7 and 10 days. So it's like a pea-sized blob every day, rubbed into the skin, generally of the thigh. The other type that's available is this one. This is called Tostran. So this can usually, you either get told to use one full pump 2 or 3 times a week, or it gets titrated into a smaller dose every day. But that will be probably via a specialist. But it certainly can help with libido. It's also worth saying that testosterone isn't just about libido. We also have testosterone receptors elsewhere. Testosterone can help with bone and muscle health. It can help with cognition, so how sharp you feel. And it can also help with your outlook, you know, kind of your joie de vivre, if you like.
Thank you for covering that, because that was one of my questions, in the sense that pre-menopause, however you have entered it, we have a cycle where our libido is higher at some points during that cycle than others, and then when you go into the menopause, that libido doesn't spike. You don't get that rush, and that can be really hard to find again.
Yeah, absolutely. Particularly if it's induced or surgical. Absolutely. Somebody's just asked. It was a point for you, Alice, about pushing. Do you resonate with pushing partners away?
Yes, absolutely. My long-suffering wife, who's peeking over the top of my computer there, smiling away.
Hello to Sarah.
And yes, it's so hard, isn't it? Because emotionally you're punishing yourself, and exactly. when you're not in that crisis mode, you're in recovery mode, and it is a big thing to just push partners and family and friends away.
And I think, as I said earlier, you know, kind of we do become very introverted, we very much internalize, but often that internalization is laced with us beating ourselves up for doing that pushing away. And, you know, that's why I think it's so vital that our partners all have information, not just from us, but information from kind of reliable sources about what's going on. I think that's also really key, because, you know, knowledge very much can be powerful, and in some cases can actually help to save those relationships.
I completely agree, and that's why when you showed the information leaflet that you've created for partners, it was a joy to see, because like you say, it's hard to start that conversation, isn't it?
It has been left on many a pillow.
Thank you so much, Diane. Before you go, can you just tell us how people can get hold of you and how they can get on board with your Make Menopause Matter campaign as well?
Yes, bless you for mentioning the campaign. I love you for that. Okay, so to get in contact, my website is menopausesupport.co.uk. The Facebook group is the Menopause Support Network. You'll find a link to there in contacts on the page. Somebody's just asked, how can you get the partners document, that's also via the website. If you go onto resources, you'll find all the things that I've spoken about. They're all free. Please do download them, share them, print them off. That's what they're there for. And the Make Menopause Matter campaign, yay! So the campaign had 3 aims. One was to have menopause put onto the new RSE curriculum, which we achieved last year. So we've just seen the curriculum. It's in there in black and white.
Absolutely incredible.
Very exciting. The other 2 aims are mandatory education for all GPs and to have menopause recognised more, sort of more thoroughly and readily in the workplace, and most importantly to have support for it. So you can find the campaign petition, which has about 118,000 signatures now, so please add your name and share, on the Menopause Support website. That would be brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you. And so that ends our webinar today. I can't thank you enough, Diane.
Oh, it's been a pleasure.
Absolutely amazing. We're going to leave the chat box open for a few minutes, and we'll also be sending out all of those links to the Make Menopause Matters campaign and the webinar again, so that you can rewatch it at a time to suit you. And for all of our webinars that are available on demand, you can go to pmdd&me.eventbrite.co.uk. But until next time, thank you, Diane.
My absolute pleasure. Lovely to see you.
And I hope to speak to you again soon.
All right, lovely. Take care.
Take care. And thank you, everybody. Have a wonderful day.
Bye-bye.